The first thing I saw when I turned onto my drive was a red notice nailed to my front door. Not a warning, not a late payment letter, a legal notice. Pierre de Gallard Abiendoend. For 3 seconds, I just sat behind the wheel of my pickup, staring at those 4 words. My house had been in my family for 32 years. My father had built the red barn with his own hands. My mother had planted the oak tree beside the porch. And that morning, I had been at the county livestock auction less than 40 minutes away. I wasn't missing, I hadn't abandoned anything. But somebody had decided my home was theirs. And what happened next would eventually expose something buried inside the county records that my HOA never expected anyone to find. I stepped out of my truck. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked toward the porch. The red notice flapped in the August wind. At the bottom was the seal of my homeowners association, Cedar Ridge Estates Property Owners Association. I pulled the paper off the door. My hands were shaking. The letter claimed the property had been visibly unoccupied for an extended period and was therefore considered abandoned under HOA community regulations. It ordered me to surrender access to the property within 72 hours. I read it twice, then a third time. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes something is so ridiculous that your brain doesn't know how else to react. My truck was parked 20 feet away. My cattle were standing in the pasture. Smoke was still rising from the chimney because I'd left the wood stove running that morning, and my neighbor's security camera pointed directly at my driveway. There was no possible way anyone could honestly believe the house was abandoned. Unless they weren't trying to prove it. Unless they were trying to create a record. I looked across the road. That's when I saw the first OA board member. Karen Whitmore stood beside a black SUV at the edge of the neighboring property. She was 61, perfectly dressed with silver blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. She held a tablet against her chest. Beside her stood 2 other board members. Nobody waved. Nobody spoke. They simply watched me. I walked toward them. Karen. She didn't answer. I held up the notice.
What is this?
She finally smiled a small, cold smile. You received the notice? I can read. Then you understand the situation? No, I said. I understand that somebody filed a fraudulent abandonment claim against my property. Her smile disappeared. Be careful with that word. Which one? Fraudulent. I took another step. You want to explain how my house became abandoned while my truck, livestock equipment, and personal belongings are sitting on it? Karen glanced toward the pasture. Then she looked back at me. The association has documented your absence. How long? She hesitated. Long enough? I laughed again. I was gone for 6 hours. One of the board members looked uncomfortable. Karen didn't. Your property has violated multiple community standards. There it is. I knew there was something else. Haas rarely cared about whether you existed. They cared about whether you obeyed. And Cedar Ridge had been looking for a reason to pressure me for nearly a year. It started with the fence. My father had built a 6-foot wooden fence around the back portion of the property long before Cedar Ridge Estates existed. When the development expanded around us, the HOA claimed the fence violated their architectural standards. I showed them the original property survey. The fence predated the HOA. They backed down. Then they complained about my barn. Then my gravel driveway. Then the old water tank behind the barn. Every time I provided documents. Every time they found something new. But 6 months earlier, Karen had made one mistake. She told me during an argument at the HOA office that my property was too valuable to remain outside the association's development plan. I'd never forgotten those words. Now I stared at her. You've wanted this land for a long time. Her expression hardened. That's an accusation. It's an observation. She turned to leave. 72 hours. I watched the 3 of them walk back toward their SUV. Then Karen stopped. She turned around. Oh, and one more thing. What? Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked at the notice in my hand. You already did. She drove away. I stood there for another minute. Then I called my lawyer. His name was Daniel Mercer. I'd known Daniel for almost 8 years, mostly because my father had used him for property matters. He answered on the second ring. What's wrong? I think the HOA just tried to take my house. There was silence. Then he said, send me everything. I photographed the notice and emailed it. Later my phone rang. Where are you? Home. Good. Don't leave. Why? Because if they're claiming abandonment, we need evidence that you're occupying the property. I looked around. My boots were covered in dust from the barn. My work gloves were sitting on the porch. A coffee mug was beside the front door. My dog was sleeping under the truck. Everything around me screamed one thing. Someone lives here, Daniel continued. Take photographs of everything. Inside and outside. Don't alter anything. Don't clean anything. Don't remove that notice. I already took it down. Put it back. I stared at the paper. You serious? Very. So I nailed it back onto my front door. Then Daniel told me something that made my stomach tighten. There's one more thing. What? Your HOA filed something with the county. I looked toward the road. What did they file? I don't know yet. Then find out. I already asked for the record. His voice changed. There's a problem. What problem? The filing references a property management agreement that gives the HOA authority to maintain and secure abandoned properties. I felt a chill. Secure. That's the language. I looked toward my barn. They're planning to come onto my land. If the filing is legitimate, they may try, can they? Not without legal authority. Do they have legal authority? That's what I'm trying to determine. I hung up. For the next 2 hours, I photographed everything. The kitchen, the bedrooms, the barn, the tractor, the cattle, the fence, the mailbox, the driveway, the security cameras. Then I walked to the county courthouse. The county records office was quiet that afternoon. A woman named Melissa Grant sat behind the counter. I gave her my property address. She typed it into the computer. Her eyebrows lifted. There's been a recent filing. I know. She clicked through several screens. Then she frowned. That's strange. What? She looked at me. The HOA isn't listed as the owner. I know that. No. She shook her head. You don't understand. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. The HOA filing references a second parcel. What second parcel? She searched again. This one. She wrote down a parcel number. I stared at it. It was the address of Cedar Ridge Estates headquarters. The same building where Karen held board meetings. The same building where HOA dues were collected. The same building that had been presented to homeowners for years as association property. Melissa leaned closer to the screen. There's something else. What? The parcel history has been modified. Modified how? There's a gap. How big? She scrolled. Months. I felt my pulse increase. What does that mean? I don't know. She clicked again. Then she stopped. Actually, what? She looked genuinely confused. This parcel doesn't appear to exist anymore. I stared at her. What? She turned the screen toward me. The HOA headquarters address is still used by the association, but the property, it's gone from the current parcel map. My stomach dropped. How does a building disappear from a county map? Melissa shook her head. It doesn't. She looked at me. Not normally. I took a photograph of the screen. Can you print the records? I can print what's available. She began pulling documents. One page. Then another. Then another. Most were routine. Property tax transfers. Assessment history. Then she reached a document dated 11 months earlier. She froze. What? Will she read it silently? Melissa. She looked up. This says the headquarters property was transferred. To whom? Was she hesitated? That's the problem. Who owns it? She looked at the computer. Then at me. Then back at the computer. The transfer is Cedar Ridge Estates Property Owners Association. And the buyer. She swallowed. There's no buyer listed. I stared at her. That's impossible. I know. Then who received the property? She shook her head. I don't know. The courthouse suddenly felt much colder. I remembered Karen's words. Too valuable to remain outside the association's development plan. I looked down at the papers. Maybe the OA wasn't trying to take my house. Maybe my house was simply the next piece of a much larger game. I thanked Melissa and left. When I reached my truck, Daniel called. I got something. What? Your HOA's attorney sent a response. What did they say? They insist the abandonment declaration is valid. Of course they do. They also say the association has no intention of taking ownership of your property. Then what do they want? There was another pause. They want temporary control. Why? They claim your property is part of a planned infrastructure corridor. I looked toward my ranch. That's a lie, I know. Did you find the original HOA declaration? Wes! Does it mention an infrastructure corridor? I felt a strange calm settle over me. Then we have them. Not yet. What do you mean? Daniel's voice became serious. Because somebody amended the county records 6 months ago. What amendment? Your property boundary. I stopped breathing for a second. Say that again. Your property boundary was changed. Without my signature, apparently. I looked at the courthouse behind me. Who requested the change? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, the survey was commissioned by Cedar Ridge Estates. I closed my eyes. Everything suddenly made sense. The fence complaints. The barn complaints. The abandonment notice. The mysterious county filing. They weren't random. They were steps. Somebody had been slowly building a paper trail. A paper trail designed to make my property look like something it wasn't. I opened my truck door. Then Daniel said the words that changed everything. The surveyor who approved the boundary change has already disappeared. What do you mean disappeared? He quit his firm. Where did he go? Nobody knows. I stared through the windshield. For the first time that day, I wasn't angry. I was scared. Because people don't erase property boundaries by accident. And they don't make surveyors disappear from the middle of a dispute unless somebody has something to hide. I drove home before sunset. As I turned onto my gravel road, I saw a black sedan parked near my mailbox. A man stood beside it. Dark suit, gray hair. No identification. He watched me approach. I slowed down. He didn't move. Then he raised one hand, not waving, pointing. At my house. I stopped the truck. The man walked toward my driver's window. Are you the owner? Who are you? He reached into his jacket. I instinctively reached toward the center console. He pulled out a business card. Then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. I'm the man who was supposed to buy your property. I stared at him. What? He handed me the card. I looked down. His name was Thomas Reed. Underneath it was the name of a development company I had never heard of. Then he leaned closer. Your HOA didn't declare your house abandoned because they wanted to punish you. Then why? His eyes moved toward the red barn. Because they needed your property to appear abandoned before they could sell the entire development project. My heart began pounding. Sell it to who? Thomas looked around as if he expected someone to be listening. Then he lowered his voice. What investment group? He looked directly into my eyes. The same group that was supposed to buy the HOA headquarters. I felt my blood run cold. That building doesn't exist in the county records anymore. Thomas smiled bitterly. Exactly. Then he stepped backward. I'd leave town if I were you. I stared at him. Why? He looked toward the road behind me. Because you're not the only property owner they tried this on. He got into his sedan. Before driving away, he lowered his window. And some of the others aren't around anymore. Then he disappeared down the road. I sat in my truck for almost 10 minutes. The sun was going down. The cattle were moving toward the barn. The red notice was still hanging from my front door. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The HOA wasn't trying to get me out of my house. They were trying to make it look like I had already left. And whatever they were planning to build on this land, they needed me gone before anyone looked too closely at the records. The next morning, I woke up at 5:17 a.m. to the sound of an engine outside my bedroom window. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed and looked through the blinds. A white utility truck was parked beside my front gate. No company logo, no county markings. Just two men standing beside it. One of them was holding a clipboard. The other was staring directly at my house. I grabbed my phone and started recording. Then the man with the clipboard walked toward my gate. He stopped beneath the security camera. He looked directly into the lens and smiled. That was when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a campaign. They wanted me to know they were watching. I called Daniel. He answered half asleep. They're here. Who's here? I don't know. Don't confront them. I'm recording. Good. Stay inside. I watched the men walk around the front boundary. They photographed my fence, my driveway, the mailbox, even the grass. Then one of them placed a small orange marker beside the road. I zoomed in with my phone. There was a number written on it, CR17. I had no idea what it meant. But Daniel did. When I sent him the photograph, he called immediately. Where did you get that? Outside my property. Don't touch it. I wasn't planning to. That marker is used in construction surveys. So somebody is preparing to survey your property? They already surveyed it? Num? Daniel paused. Apparently they're doing another one. I looked outside again. The two men were gone, but the orange marker remained. By 7:00 a.m. I was sitting in Daniel's office. He had the county documents spread across a conference table. Several maps were pinned to the wall. My property, the HOA headquarters, the surrounding development, and something called the Cedar Ridge Expansion Corridor. I pointed at the map. What is that? That's what the HOA claims your land is part of, but this isn't in the original development plan. No. Then where did it come from? Daniel tapped a document. 6 months ago? Who approved it? The HOA board. Who signed it? He turned the document toward me. Karen Whitmore. I stared at her signature. Can she do that? Not alone. Then who else signed it? Daniel pointed to 3 names. 2 were board members. The third was a man I'd never heard of. Richard Voss. Who's he? We're trying to find out. I looked at the map again. The corridor ran directly across my property. It continued through the land behind my barn. Then it connected to the property where the HOA headquarters stood, or had stood. I looked at Daniel. Why would they need my land? Because this corridor connects the development to the highway. There's already a road, not according to this plan. He tapped another map. This proposal includes a new private access road, utility lines, drainage infrastructure, and commercial development. I felt my jaw tighten. So they want to build through my ranch.
Yes.
And they need my property to do it. Exactly. But then why not just buy it? Daniel looked at me. Because you've refused every offer. I remembered the envelopes. For almost a year, I'd received letters offering to purchase my property. First under 50,000, then 1.4 million. I rejected all of them. My father's ranch wasn't for sale. I had told them that repeatedly. Daniel leaned back. They tried the easy way. And now? No, they're trying the paper way. I stared at the documents. How to launch the survey. Then do it. I already filed a preliminary objection. What happens next? County review. How long? Could be weeks. I stood up. I don't have weeks. Daniel looked at me. What? Proof that the HOA acted in bad faith. I remembered Thomas Reed, the buyer. Daniel's expression changed. What buyer? I told him everything. The black sedan, the development company, the investment group, the statement about other property owners. When I finished, Daniel was silent. Then he opened his laptop. What's the name of the company? I gave it to him. He searched. Nothing. He tried another database. Still nothing. Then he searched the name of the investment group Thomas had mentioned. This time something appeared. Daniel's face changed. What? These people are real. Who are they? Private development fund? How much money? He looked at the screen. Several hundred million. I sat down. And they're buying Cedar Ridge. They were? Where? Daniel turned the laptop around. The transaction was canceled. When? 9 months ago. I stared at the date. The same period Melissa had found the gap in the headquarters property records. Daniel scrolled further. What? The buyer wasn't purchasing the HOA headquarters. What was it buying? The entire Cedar Ridge development. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. How much? 216 million. I stared at him. $216 million.
Yes.
And my property, included in the proposed development area. I leaned back, then I remembered the amount Thomas had mentioned. The HOA headquarters wasn't the real prize. It was a piece of something much larger. I asked Daniel to print everything. He did. We spent the next 4 hours going through corporate filings. That's when we discovered the first major crack. The HOA wasn't simply an association. Several years earlier, the board had created a separate entity, Cedar Ridge Community Holdings LLC. Its purpose was listed as property management and infrastructure development. But there was something unusual. The LLC had the same mailing address as the OA, same office, same phone number, same board members. And one more thing, its manager was Richard Voss, the same man whose signature appeared on the 6-month-old expansion amendment. Daniel looked at me. This is the guy. Who? The connection between the OA and the development company. Maybe. He printed another document. The registered agent for Cedar Ridge Community Holdings LLC was a law firm in another state. I stared at the address. Why would a local HOA use an out-of-state law firm asset protection? From what? Liability? I shook my head. This is getting worse. It gets worse. Daniel pulled up a property record. This LLC owned the HOA headquarters. I leaned forward. Owned? Less? Then why did the HOA say it owned the building? I thought back. Every HOA meeting notice simply said Association Headquarters. Nobody had ever shown us the deed. Daniel continued. No, look at this. He displayed a transfer document. 9 months earlier, Cedar Ridge Community Holdings LLC transferred the headquarters property to another LLC. I read the name, CR Development Partners LLC. Who owns that? Daniel searched. The registered manager was Richard Voss. My stomach tightened. Same guy. But the county records say there's no current parcel. That's because the parcel was merged. With what? Daniel pulled up the map. The headquarters parcel had been merged into a larger tract, a tract that stretched toward the highway, a tract that included the planned expansion corridor. I stared at the map. Why would they merge the parcels? To consolidate the development property. But they can't do that if the properties aren't theirs. Daniel looked at me. That's the question. Then my phone rang. It was Melissa from the county records office. I answered. Her voice was quiet. Mr. Park, you need to come back. What happened? I found something. What? I pulled the archived parcel map. Okay, there is an older boundary. How old? 7 years. And your property wasn't inside the development corridor. I know. No. She took a breath. It wasn't just outside the corridor. What do you mean? The original HOA headquarters wasn't either. I felt my heart start pounding. Then where was it? On a different parcel. Woos! She hesitated. Your father's. I couldn't speak. My father's, the land that surrounded our ranch. The land he had sold years before I inherited the property. I grabbed my jacket. Daniel stood up. We're going. When we arrived at the county office, Melissa had several large maps spread across a table. She pointed to the original survey. This was the boundary. Then she placed the current map on top. The boundary changed. How? Digital. Daniel frowned. Digitally. Someone submitted a revised GS boundary. GS doesn't change legal ownership, Daniel said. Correct. But somebody used it to redraw the map. Melissa nodded. And then someone referenced that revised map in a property filing. Daniel looked at me. That's how they created the appearance of the corridor. I stared at the map. So the legal boundary never changed, not according to the original deed. Melissa nodded. But the county's digital map made it look like it did. I felt a surge of anger. They've been using a fake map? Potentially, Daniel said. Melissa pulled another file from a drawer. There is more. She placed a printed email on the table. What is this? It was attached to an archived county submission. Daniel read it. His expression changed. Who sent this? Melissa pointed to the bottom. Karen Whitmore. The email was dated 6 months earlier. The subject line said Rakias 2 UP8 RPA GDE. URGT. I read the message. Karen claimed several parcels had been incorrectly mapped and requested an immediate correction. One of those parcels was mine. The reason given was owner abandonment and planned association infrastructure. I looked at Daniel. They used the abandonment claim to justify changing the map. Exactly. And then they used the changed map to support the abandonment claim. Daniel nodded slowly. That's circular. Meaning, they created their own evidence. I felt something inside me shift. For weeks, I had felt like I was defending myself against a wall of paperwork. Now I could see the wall had been built with fake bricks, but we still didn't know why. Then Melissa said something that made the entire room go silent. There is one more archived document. What? She handed Daniel a sealed envelope. Someone requested that this record remain inaccessible. Daniel opened. Inside was a copy of a county planning memo. At the top was a handwritten note. DOT Rai Chipio Munti Y Kanshlibi Grovel. Daniel read the first page, then the second. Then he stopped. I looked at him. What? He didn't answer. Daniel. He finally looked up. This isn't just a development project. What is it? He turned the document around. The memo described a proposed commercial complex, private access road and utility expansion, but beneath that was a projected land acquisition value. I read the number 38.7 million. My throat went dry. 38 million. That's the projected value of the assembled parcels. And my land. Daniel pointed to a highlighted section. If they assemble the corridor, your property becomes one of the final missing pieces. I stared at the number. Suddenly the HOA dues, the fines, the fence complaints, the abandonment notice. They all looked different. This wasn't about a few $1,000s in penalties. This was about millions. And my property was standing directly in their way. I asked Melissa one question. Who requested this project? She looked uncomfortable. The county records don't say. Who signed the planning memo? She turned the page. I read the signature. My stomach dropped. It was the county commissioner. And beneath his name was another signature. Richard Voss, the same man connected to the HOA, the same man connected to the development LLC, the same man who had supposedly transferred the OA headquarters. I looked at Daniel. One need a judge. How fast? Not fast enough. Then my phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. It contained one photograph, my house. Taken from the road. Underneath it were 6 words. You should have taken the money. I stared at the screen. A second message arrived. Tomorrow they come for the barn. I looked at Daniel. They're escalating. He picked up his phone. Call the sheriff. I did. But before the sheriff could arrive, another message appeared. This one contained a photograph of my father's red barn. There was a red circle around the foundation, and beneath it T-bar I sent URs each ER. I looked at the picture for several seconds. Then I noticed something in the background. A survey marker. Not outside the fence. Not near the road. It was inside my pasture. Less than 10 feet from the barn. Someone had entered my property, and they had done it without my permission. That night, I barely slept. At 20:13 a.m., my security camera detected movement. I opened the live feed. 3 vehicles were approaching my back gate. 2 trucks, 1 SUV. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The vehicles stopped. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Then I heard a loud metallic sound. Someone was cutting my gate lock. I called the sheriff. Then I walked toward the fence. Get off my property! A one-man turned toward me. He was wearing a reflective vest. He shouted, "County authorized inspection!" I raised my phone. "Show me the authorization." He didn't. Instead, he pointed toward my barn. "That structure is subject to emergency review." "By who?" He said nothing. I could hear sirens in the distance. The men started retreating. One of them dropped a folder. I picked it up. Inside were copies of my property records. But there was something else. A typed list. 7 names. 7 property addresses. Every property was marked with the same word. Abandoned. I recognized 3 of the names. They were elderly neighbors. People I had seen at HOA meetings. People who had complained about development pressure. And suddenly Thomas Reed's warning came back to me. "You're not the only property owner they tried this on." The sheriff's cruiser arrived. Deputies stepped out. The men from the utility trucks were already driving away. I handed the folder to the sheriff. He looked at the list, then at me. "Where did you get this?" One of the men dropped it. He studied the page. "This is going to get complicated." I looked toward my barn. "No," I shook my head. "It's already complicated." I looked at the 7 names again. Then I realized something. The properties weren't random. They formed a line, a perfect line. And that line led directly to the highway. The same highway shown on the secret development plan. The same corridor the HOA had claimed didn't exist. That was the moment I understood what they had been doing. They weren't trying to force 7 homeowners out individually. They were assembling one enormous piece of land, one property at a time. And my ranch was the final piece. But there was one thing they didn't know. I still had my father's original deed. And hidden inside that deed was a boundary description that could destroy their entire project. The original deed was sitting in a metal box beneath my father's workbench. I hadn't opened that box in years. My father had always told me the same thing whenever I asked why he kept old property papers instead of putting everything in a bank vault. Paper remembers what people try to forget. At the time, I thought it was just something an old rancher said. That night, I finally understood. I drove home with the sheriff's words still ringing in my ears. "Keep that deed somewhere safe." I waited until Daniel arrived before opening the box. Inside were old tax receipts, survey maps, photographs, handwritten notes, and dozens of documents my father had accumulated over 3 decades. At the bottom was a brown envelope. My name was written on it in his handwriting. I opened it. Inside was the original deed. Daniel unfolded it carefully across the kitchen table. For nearly 20 minutes we studied the legal description. Then Daniel suddenly stopped. "What?" We pointed to a sentence. "This is it." I leaned over. The deed contained an old boundary description referencing a natural creek, an oak grove, and an iron survey marker installed before the Cedar Ridge development existed. Daniel compared it with the modern survey. His eyes widened. "The OA's new survey crosses the wrong side of the creek." So their entire corridor is shifted. "How much?" "Enough." He pulled out a calculator. "If this description is valid, the access road they're planning isn't on the parcels they claim. Whose land is it on?" Daniel looked at me. "Yours." I felt a strange sense of relief. Then he added, "And possibly county easement land." That was even bigger. If the development plan depended on crossing county-controlled property, the HOA couldn't simply use its own documents to create a private corridor. We photographed every page, then Daniel made copies. At 60:40 the next morning, he filed an emergency motion in county court. By noon, Karen Whitmore had received notice. On 1:15 p.m., she was standing outside my gate. This time she wasn't alone. She had 3 board members, an attorney, and 2 security guards with her. I stepped onto the porch. Karen shouted from the road, "You've made a serious mistake." I held up the court filing.
"No."
I looked directly at her. "You did?" Her attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Parker, the association has lawful authority to inspect the property. Show me the order." He hesitated. "There is no order, then leave." Karen stepped forward. "This property is subject to association restrictions. The property existed before your association." She narrowed her eyes. "You're going to regret this." I smiled. "That's what you said yesterday." Then a sheriff's cruiser pulled up behind them. 2 deputies stepped out. Karen immediately changed her tone. "We're simply here to resolve a misunderstanding." The deputy looked at me. "Do you want them removed?" I looked at Karen. For a second I considered saying yes. Then I remembered the 7 names in that folder. "No." I shook my head. Karen smiled. She thought I'd back down. But I pointed at the security guards. "I want their names recorded." The deputy nodded. Then I looked at the attorney. "And I want everything they photographed today entered into the court record." His smile disappeared. Karen stared at me. For the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Not anger. Fear. She knew something I didn't. Or maybe she knew I was getting close. That afternoon, Daniel received a call from a surveyor. His name was Michael Torres. He had worked for the engineering firm that performed the original Cedar Ridge survey, and he wanted to meet. We met at a diner outside town. Michael looked exhausted. He placed a folder on the table. I should have come forward months ago. What happened? He looked at Daniel. Your OA's second survey wasn't a normal survey. What do you mean? They gave us a digital boundary file. Ooh, Richard Voss. Michael opened the folder. They told us the file represented the approved parcel boundaries, but it didn't know. He slid a map across the table. It had been altered. Daniel studied it. Did you tell them? I refused to certify it. What happened? Michael looked down. 2 days later, I was removed from the project. And the surveyor who approved it? He was pressured. By whom? Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. Richard Voss. Michael reached into his folder. I kept the original field notes. Daniel looked up. Are these admissible? If we can authenticate them? Can you? Michael nodded. I took the measurements myself. That was the break we needed. The original survey, the field deed, the county GIS history, the abandoned property filing, the development proposal, and the 7 properties marked for acquisition. We had a story. But stories don't win court cases. Evidence does. Daniel filed everything. 3 days later, the judge granted an emergency injunction. The OA was prohibited from entering my property. The county was ordered to preserve the original GIS records. And Cedar Ridge Estates was temporarily barred from altering or transferring the disputed parcels. Karen wasn't finished, neither was Richard Voss. 2 days after the injunction, the HOA called an emergency meeting. I attended. So did almost every homeowner. The room was packed. Karen stood at the front. She looked exhausted, but she still tried to control the room. This entire situation has been caused by misinformation. I raised my hand. She ignored me. Our association has always acted in the best interests of residents. Someone shouted from the back. Then why did you sell the headquarters? The room went silent. Karen froze. Another homeowner stood. Yeah. Where is the headquarters property? Karen's attorney immediately intervened. This meeting is not about property transactions. A woman near the window stood up. My house is on your abandoned list. Another voice followed. Mine too. Then another. Within seconds, people were talking over one another. I realized the 7 names weren't the only properties. They had started preparing files on dozens. The room erupted. Karen looked toward Richard Voss. He had been sitting quietly in the back. Now he stood. Nuff. Everyone turned. He walked to the front. We were trying to protect property values. A homeowner shouted, "Be stealing our land." Richard slammed his hand on the table. I stood. Then explained the $216 million purchase agreement. Silence. Richard looked at me. I continued. Explain the 38 points in million corridor valuation. His face changed. Explain the altered survey. Karen whispered something to him. I heard one word. Leave. But it was too late. Someone had already called the local news. Cameras arrived outside. By the following morning, the story was everywhere in the county. The headline wasn't about an abandoned ranch anymore. It was about a homeowners association accused of manipulating property records to facilitate a multi-million-dollar development deal. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The county clerk found the missing headquarters records. The property hadn't vanished. It had been transferred through 3 shell entities. The final recipient was a company controlled by Richard Voss. And the sale price, $1. The county immediately opened an investigation. Then investigators found something even worse. The HOA had continued collecting maintenance fees from homeowners while representing that the headquarters remained association property. Nearly $400,000 had moved through accounts connected to the development entities. Karen resigned within 48 hours. 3 board members followed. Richard Voss disappeared. At least that's what everyone thought. 2 weeks later, federal investigators found him at an airport hotel several states away. He wasn't charged with some dramatic movie-style crime. There was no secret vault, no hidden mansion, no getaway helicopter. There was something much more ordinary. Paperwork, hundreds of pages of it, bank transfers, emails, property agreements, internal messages, and one email that became the centerpiece of the case. It was sent by Richard to Karen 6 months before my abandonment notice. The subject line read D, Parker property, final obstacle. The email contained only one sentence. Once the county map is corrected, we can classify the property as abandoned and complete the acquisition corridor. That sentence destroyed their entire defense, because it proved the abandonment claim wasn't based on my absence. It was part of a plan. The court later ruled that the HOA had no authority to declare my property abandoned. The county restored the original boundaries. The altered GS data was corrected. The development corridor was canceled. And the 7 homeowners whose properties had been targeted received formal protection under the settlement. As for my ranch, I never sold it. Not for $850,000. Not for $1.4 million. Not even when the final offer reached $3.2 million. The red barn stayed. The wooden fence stayed. The oak tree my mother planted stayed. And the gravel road still sounds exactly the same when a truck comes home at sunset. But there was one final thing I had to deal with. The AOA itself. After the investigation, the homeowners voted to dissolve the old board and create an independent management structure. No secret development company. No private land acquisition committee. No board-controlled shell entities. And most importantly, every major property decision had to be disclosed to the homeowners. At the first meeting under the new board, I was asked to speak. I stood in the same room where Karen had once threatened me. I looked at the homeowners. Some were angry. Some were embarrassed. Some were simply tired. I held up my father's original deed. My father gave me this because he believed land wasn't just dirt. I paused. It's history. Nobody spoke. I continued. People can change maps. They can change company names. They can move money between accounts. They can create new paperwork. I looked around the room. But they can't change what really happened. After the meeting, an elderly woman approached me. She had been one of the 7 homeowners on that list. She took my hand. My husband wanted to leave, she said. He thought we couldn't fight them. I told her what my father used to say. Paper remembers. She smiled. Your father was right. Months later, the county officially archived the investigation records. The Cedar Ridge expansion project was dead. The headquarters building sat empty for a while. Eventually, it was sold at auction and turned into a small community center. The strange part was the old sign. For years, it had read, Cedar Regi Istas Proparo Nars Asashiom. After everything was over, the new owners took it down. They left the wall bare. I drove past it one evening and stopped. The sun was setting behind the building. I looked at the empty wall and thought about how close I'd come to losing everything. Not because I had abandoned my home, but because someone had tried to make the record say that I had. I drove home. The cattle were grazing. The barn lights were on. My dog was waiting at the gate, and the red notice that had once been nailed to my front door was now sitting inside a frame above my father's workbench. I kept it there for one reason. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Because the most dangerous thing about losing your property isn't always someone taking the land. Sometimes it's someone convincing the world that you never owned it in the first place. My father once told me that paper remembers what people try to forget. He was right. And when they tried to erase my home from the map, they accidentally left behind the evidence that saved it. They tried to make my house disappear from the records. Instead, they made sure their own secrets could never disappear again.